This is one of those subjects where I look at the landscape and think, there are people who are older, far more insightful, knowledgeable, and wiser on a subject like this than I could ever hope to be. So what exactly are you hoping to gain here listening to a midwit like me? I'm rather perplexed by that one, quite honestly. 3 years in and I'm still not used to the fact that anyone wants to hear my opinion on anything. It's still kind of surreal to me, but anyway. Tucker Carlson, a former Fox News anchor, ever since he's been freed from the shackles and stench of Murdoch, has used X to give the dying world of journalism a kick in the bollocks, repeatedly, and it's thoroughly deserved at that. So if you've been living under a rock for a while, Tucker went to Russia a while ago to interview its president, Vladimir Putin. Needless to say, the reaction to even the concept of him doing such a thing has caused a bit of a stir. I wonder why, which personally I think is more interesting than the interview itself. If you want to know what Putin said, I would suggest watching the interview for yourself. I don't think my rantings would do the man's work any justice. So my focus will be on the conduct, both of the interview and the media landscape surrounding it. Let's get down to brass tacks here, people. What was the purpose of this? Who was ultimately the big winner here? Putin was, hands down. And the collective West is damn near solely responsible for handing him a guaranteed win on a silver platter. We all know the narrative, and every story needs a villain, and for whatever reason, Russia has been selected as the enemy of the collective West, but particularly America. Why? Who the hell knows? The apparatus being staffed with old boomers with a grudge, Russia has tremendous resources, which if traded have the capacity to rival and question the necessity of American military occupation of Europe. Naturally, this would lead to the weakening of American influence in Europe. After all, who the hell spends wickedly on defense against a trading partner? It makes no sense, much like every American foreign policy when viewed absent of the pressure of military might. Frankly, the anti-Russian propaganda in the West has been so absurd it's degraded the reputation of the so-called media to broken rust. America is now home to the least trusted media in the world. As shocking as that should be on paper, one would hardly be surprised to see why in practice. America is not a serious nation, and its media comes off more like a dysfunctional circus hell-bent on scoring cheap ratings rather than being objective. About, well, frankly anything, really. Which again is not a surprise, it's a functioning organ of the state, much the same way they claim Russia's media is. Pushing an insane agenda, it's no wonder everyone on television comes across like they're all lobotomized. All of these factors and materials built the silver platter that was presented to Putin. And the media, being intellectually bankrupt, boring and void of anything new to say after they've painted themselves into this mind-numbingly stupid corner, the impotent cries of calling Tucker a Kremlin puppet was more inevitable than the bloody tides. And given America's piss-poor excuse for a vegetable masquerading as the chief executive, which is operating in name only, let's not kid ourselves over here, Putin's path to victory couldn't be any easier. He had one job: look sane. That's it. To say he crushed that would be the understatement of the century. The interview and the subject matter itself would completely fly over the head of especially the average American. It is interesting to note, though, that Tucker himself started off the episode by saying Putin spoke at length about Russia's history, and even he was thinking it's a filibustering technique. Why? Because he's thinking like an American. I'm aware this is Russia and therefore everything is to be taken with a grain of salt, unlike Western governments who never lie about anything ever. But that this is considered a filibustering technique really does say something. America is like an arrogant trust fund child, and Russia the seasoned scarred warrior. It's not some land isolated away from any and all troubles. It's got neighbors, a long and rich history of people, of language and disputes, monarchical statecraft. It's seen and lived through things centuries before the American state even existed. I do think the history lesson does offer a sort of symbiotic kingship with his own reign as head of state, in a way that shows the Americans we are not like you. Things that the American mind cannot even comprehend because they're hopelessly ignorant and very isolated from these kinds of affairs, for a whole list of reasons. State operations, propaganda, youth and geography come to mind. Although I would say the main reason is simply Americans just don't care. The functioning of the lengthy introduction will no doubt be up for debate. Is it filibustering? Is it Putin flexing? Is it propaganda of his own? I hesitate to comment on what in his heart or head. I'm going off perception of his character in this intimate setting to which we have been treated. Although in my opinion one thing is for certain, Putin gives an outstanding performance as the head of Russia. The sincerity of this will undoubtedly be called into question, but he certainly gives the impression the Russian state is very close to his heart. But typically speaking, I tend to avoid the lowbrow mouth breathers who claim this assessment is uncritical. I find those same voices only apply their criticism to a regime they've never experienced firsthand and don't live under. yet contort themselves into disarray defending the oppressive actions of the state they do live under. Case in point, one like this. A regime you've never lived under you treat with skepticism and suspicion, despite you knowing nothing about it also drives your suspicion, that is understandable, yet intimate experience at the hand of the one you do live under can oppress you and nary a freaking eyebrow would be raised. I'd have to conclude this is either an act of self-preservation or the cope of one with an axe lodged in their skull. But the tweet there is correct. We do trust him more because he is the opposition of these untrusted Western governments. Not only that, but his conduct alone significantly heightens his status. He is not a politician. Putin is a statesman. He knows that the West demonizes him at every turn and uses him as a fall guy for all of their stupid problems. He knows the Western media apparatus. We all do. It's the main one in the world. He points that out in the interview. Look at the opportunity he is presented with here. He's sitting down with an American, one that's been partly decoupled yet largely demonized by the very same media apparatus that's lambasted him. Now, Putin would naturally be cautious, he's a shrewd operator after all, but there's an element of kindred spirit here. Same with Roger Stone. Both him and Tucker said Putin is sincere. I know Putin knows this because I know this. Couple this with the fact the Western regime refuses to engage in any dialogue, as he has seen and both experienced firsthand. He knows he can speak rather plainly and give his side of history, because the Western regime will flat out refuse to even bother with anything he has to say. Which means he is given free rein to steer the conversation in any direction he wants to. He can dictate the terms. The Western regime is not going to engage with him. They'll just keep demonizing him. They've exhausted all other options. What are they going to do? Try and go toe-to-toe with him and give their side of the story? Who would believe them at this point anyway? The reputation is in tatters, shot to pieces. We have no reason to trust any of them. Putin will be seen in a glowing light, whereas the shrieks of the West will be dismissed as nothing more than the screeching of the boy who cried wolf. Cheers for watching, and once again, I apologize for nothing.